What is a survival myth that's completely wrong and could get you killed? Australian Doc here. What you want to do is stop the venom from traveling from the site of the bite into the lymphatic system and then into the bloodstream. Do not suck, cut, wash, or otherwise investigate the wound. Edit. Do not try to catch or kill the snake. Identifying the kind of snake is not worth the risk of a second bite and the delay in getting to your other priorities. Priority 1, get away from the snake. Priority 2, get help. Get someone nearby to call an ambulance, or worst case scenario, call yourself. Edit. Leaving this here because it's hilarious. Priority 3, stay still. Moving your muscles is what helps pump the fluid through your lymphatic system and into the lymph nodes, where it can enter the bloodstream quickest. Ideally, keep the bite below your heart, but immobilization is the most important thing. Priority 4, if there's someone with you, get them to apply a pressure dressing to tightly compress the whole limb. This can greatly slow the flow of lymph and buy you hours. The issue with a tourniquet, as opposed to full limb compression, is that you're not actually preventing the spread of lymph up the limb. Taking the tourniquet off then becomes very risky for a sudden influx of venom into the central circulation and has serious risks of permanent damage and loss to the limb. I can only speak for what to do regarding Australian snakes. Other areas obviously have different species and perhaps correspondingly different guidelines. If you're doing outdoorsy crap in other continents, make sure you know your basic first aid relevant to that specific location. Story 2. Rescue breaths are wildly overrated in most movies and TV shows. You'll see someone in cardiac arrest, and the rescuer will stop giving compressions and focus on breathing into a person's mouth and blammo, awake, alert, alive. Nope, don't do that. Your body does store a fairly decent amount of oxygen in its blood at all times. If someone in front of you ODs and their mouth is covered with saliva/vomit, or someone collapses in front of you of a suspected cardiac arrest, your plan of action is twofold. 1. Are they breathing? Do they have a pulse? This is easy to F up, especially in a moment of panic. My rule as an EMS provider is that if you don't feel it in 10 seconds, it's not there. Start compressions. If they're not in cardiac arrest, they'll let your ass know, and the law covers you under Good Samaritan clauses in most of these cases. 2. If you're the only person attending to this body, do not stop and give rescue breaths if help is on the way and will be there soon. It takes about 4 to 7 decent compressions to get blood recirculating in the body after stopping to give mouth to mouth. That's a lot of blood, carrying a lot of vital oxygen reserves that aren't making it to the brain. Obviously, if you're a long way out from help and you feel safe to do so, give rescue breaths, but it should never be priority number 1. Story 3. The first mistake is to look for food and water first before having a shelter up to keep yourself dry and warm. Edit. When I say shelter first, it includes having a fire too, which I forgot to mention. When you're wet and exposed to the elements, your core body temperature can drop and you can get hyperthermia if it gets too cold, and you would burn more calories than necessary. A big reason to building a shelter too is to also keep yourself off the ground, because the ground is an infinite heat sink, which means you lose your body heat way faster than you would think and will be more exposed to the cold/elements. Guys, it's good to be near a water source, but remember that it's always colder around rivers, streams, lakes, and oceans. Be sure you're able to easily gather shelter/fire material within the area, plus finding a prime location to set up shelter. I feel like a book right now. Thanks for the silver. So just to compound upon this, anyone that's ever done like intermittent fasting can also attest to this. After about the first 24 hours of your body going without food, it enters into the ketosis state. And once you reach ketosis, your body's metabolism slows almost down to a crawl. So your appetite's suppressed and you find that you actually don't need as much food and nourishment as you normally would. So those first 24 hours are definitely tough, but once you reach ketosis, you're good to go. So yeah, I co-sign on this. Shelter first, food later. Story 4. If done right, a tourniquet should hurt like a mother effer, and you're going to want to loosen it. But in the words of Egon Spengler, it would be bad. Gradually loosening an applied tourniquet over time is a thing I still see in first aid training videos for some reason. Don't do that. Once a tourniquet is on, remember, and mark the person if you can, what time it was applied and leave the rest to doctors in a stable environment. Loosening a tourniquet may result in blood loss returning, which requires retightening it. Tightening/loosening repeatedly may cause, on top of additional blood loss, blood to pool up inside the limb, which can cause even more damage. Many folks have said that recent advances have prolonged that time. I can't find a source to validate that, but it seems believable. Would like one if anybody has one, as TQ use has heavily increased increased in the military and civilian world in the past 15 years thanks to the cat, so I'm guessing surgeons have worked with them more. This much more recent study cites that most amputations are due to the injury sustained, not tourniquet use. A multi-center study demonstrated 88% effectiveness in pre-hospital tourniquet application with significantly lower mortality and amputation rates than in American military experience. Krag et al.'s military cohort had a 35% amputation rate, with several civilian series having a frequency of 17 to 29%. We theorized that injury severity was critical in the decision to amputate than the presence of a tourniquet. A significant number of the initial amputations had mangled, nearly amputated arms or legs from high-speed motorcycle or all-terrain vehicle crash. Despite the higher rate of initial amputation, there was no increase in morbidity, mortality, or length of stay in the TQ plus patients. Story 5. Can think of multiple. Basic wilderness survival is required to be taught where I live. Don't drink your pee if you're thirsty. It's high in salt and will make you more dehydrated, just like ocean water. Eating snow when you're thirsty is also bad. It lowers your core temperature and you can become hypothermic. Don't play dead with all bears. Depends on the bear. Some will definitely F your crap up if you play dead. Grizzly bears, stand your ground and back up slowly. If it becomes irritated, get into the fetal position and cover your neck and play dead. Black bears, throw rocks and sticks at it, and make a lot of noise. From my experience, black bears are skittish and run away. Polar bears, back away slowly to safety. If they attack, defend yourself by any means necessary. Remember to always carry bear spray or a gun if you're in bear country. Story 6. Trying to outrun a tornado is about the worst possible thing you can do in a tornado situation. Take shelter, get underground, go into an interior room, lay in a ditch while covering your head if you have to. Tornadoes are basically like 3-year-olds throwing temper tantrums, except instead of toys, it's cars, buses, and trains they're throwing around, but also toys too, which they can throw hard enough to literally pass through your body. A vehicle of any kind is about the last place you want to be when a tornado comes through. Edit. And sure enough, I've got people telling me that, nuh-uh, you can totally outrun a tornado because storm chasers do it all the time and tornadoes only move like 30 mph, which is objectively false. Their top speed is more like 70 mph. But don't listen to a random Redditor like me. Here's what the CDC has to say about it. If you're in a car, do not try to outrun a tornado, but instead find the nearest sturdy building. And the NOAA has this to say. Vehicles are extremely risky in a tornado. There's no safe option when caught in a tornado in a car, just slightly less dangerous ones. If the tornado is visible, far away, and the traffic is light, you may be able to drive out of its path by moving at right angles to the tornado. Seek shelter in a sturdy building, or underground if possible. I hope discerning Redditors will work out that what they're advising here is not to try to outrun a tornado, but that you don't need to get out of your vehicle if you're very far away from one. In the National Weather Service, being in a vehicle during a tornado is not safe. The best course of action is to drive to the closest shelter. If you're unable to make it to a safe shelter, either get down in your car and cover your head, or abandon your car and seek shelter in a low-lying area such as a ditch or a ravine. So, in short, never try to outrun a tornado, and anyone who ever tells you otherwise is objectively wrong in spreading dangerous misinformation. End of discussion. Story 7. Sticking your finger up a dog's bum. I've read this a few times. Not a good idea. The best way to deal with a dog attack is to try to move away slowly, sideways with your arms at your sides so that you're not threatening. Don't look at the eyes and don't smile. Both are seen as a challenge. Don't run away. The dog will instinctively chase you. Get up high if you can. Dogs can't climb very well. If crap hits the fan, do the opposite of looking unthreatening. Stand tall with your arms in the air and growl or roar. If there's something nearby, throw it at the dog to make it think twice. Wrap clothing around your arm to hand to the dog should it go in for a bite. You're pretty much guaranteed to be bit, so make it in a place that's less important and less likely to bleed out. Don't lose your footing or fall to the ground. You'll be toast. Don't pull away from the dog if it has bitten you. This will cause more damage. Once the dog has bitten you, it probably won't let go. Aim to kill or maim the dog. Fingers in the eyes are good. Jumping on the dog with all your body weight is better. If you break their ribs, they'll probably give up. Staying away from aggressive dogs is your best bet. So while I do appreciate this advice, I have never once heard anyone recommend to stick your finger up their bum if a dog were to attack you. That's news to me, but hey, thanks for sharing. Story 8. One thing you see in a lot of older movies and even today is to conserve your water if you're in a desert or if you lack water. Never do that. If all you do is drink enough to stop being thirsty, the water won't reach necessary organs and parts of your body. Over time, you'll be underhydrated and can suffer the effects of dehydration without ever feeling thirsty. The best usage of your water is to drink it at set intervals even if you're not thirsty. Also, don't drink large amounts of water at once. Your body won't be used to it, and more of it's going to be wasted via urination than if you space out reasonably sized swigs throughout the day. In the same vein, if you're ever hiking, working, or going to be outside in hot and dry climates, leave the shorts and tank top at home, and instead go for thin and loose-fitting long-sleeve shirts and loose-fitting pants. The biggest threat to your health is the sun. Avoid direct sun exposure whenever possible. Sunblock is solid enough for shorter trips, but you're going to be sweating off even the best of the stuff, so be sure to constantly reapply when directed to, or if your skin gets too wet. Loose-fitted clothing also helps slow down how fast your sweat will evaporate into the air. Normally, you want to have sweat evaporate, as that's how your body will lose the excess heat, as the sweat will draw heat away from your body and cool you down when the wind hits you. But in this case, you're losing sweat too fast for your body to transfer much, if any, heat, as the sun is hot enough to evaporate your sweat as soon as you start sweating. Limiting your evaporation also stops you from wasting a ton of water via constantly sweating, which is one of the biggest factors of water loss you should avoid. Story 9. I watch a lot of fight videos on Reddit subs, and one of two things pretty much always happens when someone gets knocked out. Either their friends come and try to pick them up, shake them, and slap them on the face to regain consciousness, or they're left there on their back while people film and laugh and say, "You got knocked the F out." These are both bad things to do because that person has just suffered possible serious trauma to their head, especially if they smacked it on the pavement when they came down. So shaking them awake is not a great thing to do. It might seem like leaving them be and recover on their own is a better idea, but it's not always because they run the risk of choking on their tongue. The best thing to do is put them in the recovery position, which will make sure they don't have problems breathing until they regain their bearings, and if they don't after a while, it's a safe way for them to be until medical help comes. Story 10. Not quite as sexy and interesting as the rest of these, but if you're walking alone at night, putting a key between each finger, with the thought that you can punch someone and they'll be impaled by 3 keys, is useless. You're much more likely to hurt the webbing on your fingers since the grip you have on each key will be really weak. Instead, put a single key between your thumb and forefinger, parallel to your thumb, and make a fist. This still isn't a great defense, but it is an improvement over simply a fist. Also, don't try to kick a man in the crotch unless you have an amazing shot, in which case you're probably better off running away. If you miss or don't kick hard enough, both of which are more likely in the case when you're likely panicking, you're just going to cause mild discomfort and piss him off even more. So I'm just going to speak on this as a dude that has unfortunately had the displeasure of multiple shots near that area of the body. Sometimes it doesn't require a direct hit to bring you to your knees. It's like just an instinctual thing as a guy, like anytime you suffer a trauma anywhere in that area, I mean, you might as well have hit it dead on and you still go down anyway. So I don't know if that's just like a placebo or what, but I slightly disagree with that only because I've experienced it before where I've been hit like in the upper thigh and it feels like, they hit the mark and, I go down. I'm talking about like sports, not someone trying to get me off of them. Just so we're clear. Story 11. Do not play dead with all animals. Coming from a town at the base of the Rocky Mountains, with grizzly bears play dead. Black bears are actually not aggressive unless you threaten them, so if you see a black bear with their baby or a baby black bear, calmly walk out of there and you should be fine. But with a mountain lion, if you turn your back or play dead, your throat is going to get ripped out. Do not run though. You cannot and will not outrun it. Get very big and very loud and fight back at all costs. Also, a little tip. If you're about to get attacked by a shark, swim directly at it. You're probably about to die. Might as well give it your best shot. Sharks don't want to fight. They're curious as to what you are, and they want to nibble on you. Of course, to a human, a nibble means being chopped in half. Anyways, if a shark senses that you're a threat, it will possibly retreat as it does not want to fight and would rather catch an easy bite to eat. If it does attack you, that's when you try and go for the eyes. Story 12. Having a weapon next to your bed will make you safer. Operational conditioning is a founding principle when we go through basic training in the military. Just like being able to tie your shoes without thinking about it, the goal is to hardwire survival responses into our subconscious so we do the right thing without thinking about it. Because they know that if you have to stop and think about it, you die. To make matters worse, the adrenaline rush of being in a violent situation actually ruins your higher mind functionality altogether. Your fine motor skills, detailed observation capabilities, even hearing, sight, and coordination are all drastically diminished. The uncomfortable reality is we actually do turn into the clumsy damsel in distress we see in horror movies. In a home invasion scenario, whatever weapon you choose to have, if you aren't trained to a point of intimate familiarity with it, you're more likely to have that weapon turned against you when it matters most. Story 13. A few winters ago, I was outside my building with my roommate having a smoke. The back of the building backed out to an alleyway which connected to more alleyways. It's a big city, so there are raccoons, the odd rat here and there, and alley cats. So we're having our smoke and I hear some barking, and the sound of a dog struggling against its leash. A moment later, I see two people and a bulldog come around the corner. Well, the bulldog clearly is excited by all the animals to chase. Something clicked in me. I just suddenly knew what was about to happen. The dog lunged forward and practically toppled the owner, who released the leash. The dog, not wearing a muzzle, looks at me dead in the eyes and makes a mad dash for me. Time sort of slowed down for me. The first thing I realized was the dog was looking me right in the balls. The second was how fast it was accelerating. The third was the patch of black ice behind me. The fourth and final realization was that I didn't really want to hurt this poor animal. So I jumped across the patch of ice and did the old sideways hip shield to protect the gruesome twosome. The dog's paws hit the ice as it leaped. Thankfully, it slipped as I took off, causing him to veer slightly off course, and a sudden look of bewilderment as it opened its mouth. I gave it a good slap on the nose as it tried to latch onto my thigh, trying to push back against it. Thankfully, things precipitated in such a way that my leg slipped out of its jaw before it could clench. I got away with a more or less superficial wound. The owners leaped to grab the leash and yank the dog away, and then vanished before I could even ask if it was up to date on its shots. The crazy thing is, my roommate was the easier target. Not just closer, but mostly unaware. My mistake? I'm certain it's because I looked it in the eyes. Story 14. Listening to half the things Bear Grylls says. Listen to Les Stroud instead of some of the things Bear Grylls has are just absolutely insane. Like the time he told us to just take a shortcut through the glacier, or the time you said wrap your foot up in a vine and swing off a cliff instead of going around. Sounds cool, and it wouldn't be such an issue if you had access to immediate medical services and emergency personnel, but the whole point is that you're out in the wilderness alone by yourself trying to survive. Just my opinion. You know, one thing that I remember Les Stroud saying that has just always stuck in my head, and I'm just going to share it with you guys. You might already know it. If you don't have to stand up, sit down. If you don't have to sit down, lay down. If you don't have to be awake as you lay, go to sleep. I love that. Story 15. Cauterizing a wound. I saw a bunch of people suggesting this to a man who cut his hand and it wouldn't stop bleeding. Never, never do this. Burning yourself exacerbates the effects. It doesn't halt them. Bleeding equals shock equals volumetric hypoperfusion. Burning equals shock equals volumetric hypoperfusion. You're basically taking what blood you have left and throwing it out the window. You'd pass out and die pretty much immediately. Note, obviously, I mean don't ever do this yourself. Cauterizing a wound in a safe medical environment is different. Story 16. Food is not a major priority in a survival situation, yet many so-called survival kits focus on often fanciful ways of getting food like setting snares or fishing. Follow the rule of threes. 3 minutes without air, 3 hours of exposure to extreme temperatures or damp and moderate cold, 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food are the point at which situations become life-threatening hazards. Based on that, it's obvious you can survive off energy reserves for a while. Your first priorities are conserving heat, finding hydration, and finding your way out. Food is a distant tertiary concern unless your situation is far beyond the norm. It's also not worth the risk of giving yourself diarrhea or causing vomiting, which will tax your water reserves, risking poisoning yourself, or risking an injury or a venomous sting or bite in a confrontation with wildlife unless you anticipate your situation lasting many days. Story 17. Grew up around bears and hunting. Bears, guiding in bears, and I did mention bears. Grizzly bears, black bears, Kodiaks too. Laying down and playing dead is a really horrific way to get killed, or even worse, not killed, but to have your eyes, tongue, and facial skin slowly peeled and bit out, so you'll wish you were dead. I know. Someone here has Googled the internet so they can paste a handful of internet published accounts where someone played dead and it worked. though they're crippled/mutilated for life. But the problem is that bears might be the most unpredictable, intelligent critters on the planet. You'll never know what they will do. Grizzlies might charge you and stop whether you play dead or stand still, or they might think you're crouching and savage you for laying down, and black bears might run away if you wave your arms and shout, or they might panic and savage the hell out of you, or who knows. You'd be better standing very still and do not glare at them, and don't appear to be facing them down. Very calmly meander away from them, but don't run or scream. Bad news, that may or may not work, so be prepared to also run screaming, which may or may not work. But probably the worst thing you can do is lay down and play dead, because for you, that just limited almost all those other options and therefore your chances. By the way, also persistent stories go that you can scare off a black bear but not a grizzly. Really? Are you really sure about that? Holy hell, last week I was back home and saw a sow, a female black bear, who was so massive and whiny looking, I don't think a Kodiak would have dared cross her path. Blacks might be even more unpredictable than any other. With bears, you're better to consider their age and sex and forget what kind it is. A young Kodiak bear will scamper off too. A massive black bear might decide to kick the crap out of a limp, motionless human in its way. I suppose I cannot say playing dead is completely wrong, because it has, the odd time, worked well enough, allegedly, but it's wrong enough that it should be disregarded as a survival tip of any trustworthiness that could just as well get you killed, or worse too. Story 18. Don't suck the venom if a snake bites you. It's dangerous because you can still die from a small amount of venom. Call the ambulance ASAP, even if you know the snake is not venomous, because you can still get an infection. Tree moss, or any kind of moss, doesn't grow only in north. Not deadly, but it can confuse you. Don't pee on a jellyfish if it stings somebody. Urine can actually aggravate the jellyfish's stingers into releasing more venom. If an animal eats something unfamiliar to you, don't eat it. Animals and humans have different digestive systems. Sorry for my bad English. Story 19. That just because you're a former insert Boy Scout, policeman, serviceman, first responder, you know what you're doing. You don't. The fact is, people die because they, quote, know all about how to survive. Hunker down, find or build an adequate shelter, start a safe fire if you can, then carefully seek out food and water, and conserve what you have if you have any. Then, once you're safe, trust that people will be looking for you. If you have a space close to your shelter, prepare a signal fire to be lit when, and only when, you hear or see, or both, a rescue craft. That will make it easier for them to find you. But for God's sake, make sure the fire is controllable and that a source of water is available to put it out. If you can't guarantee that, don't build the very thing that will kill you, an out-of-control forest fire. Most people die because they don't hunker down and wait. If you have someone with you, one of the necessary and humiliating things you may need to do to save each other's lives is digital fecal extraction to relieve constipation caused by dehydration. Yes, that is a thing. Stick your finger up someone's ass and dig out their poop. A life-saving technique that not many get trained on. Also, Bambi is very dangerous. Yes, you can make noise and many creatures will skedaddle. Deer, however, have been known to attack people, so avoid them. Unless you know how to make a weapon from twigs that can take down a deer with one blow, stick to hunting smaller prey. Finally, do not eat the mushrooms unless you happen to be Walt Sturgeon or his peer. Some edible mushrooms look nearly identical to the deadly ones, and you would not be the first to make that mistake. So, hunker down, shelter, then water, then food, and wait. Story 20. Breaking windows if someone's house is on fire and they're inside. Most fires in a modern construction residential building are ventilation controlled due to the high heat release rate from all the hydrocarbon fuels in every item in your home and the efficient insulation used today. Your home is basically sealed. When you break an outside window, you create a ventilation opening, a flow path for oxygen to enter, and a low-pressure opening for hot fire gases to escape. This will make it easier for fire and smoke to spread through the house, and in almost every scenario, make the fire worse and decrease chances of survival. As a side note, one of the absolute best precautions you can take, besides having working smoke alarms, is to close bedroom doors. If you have a closed bedroom door and fire originates in another area of the house, your chances of survival increase exponentially. Close your damn doors when you go to bed. Also, a 9-volt battery is less than $2 and it will save your life. Story 21. There have been documented cases of people surviving aircraft crashes because they were in the tail of the aircraft. We also placed the flight data recorder in the tail because it's most likely to survive back there. Despite all this, sitting in the back of an aircraft will not protect you any more than sitting up front. The documented cases were extreme situations like striking a mountain or breaking up mid-flight. With today's technology and laws, that will likely never happen again. You're more likely to be involved in a crash landing, if anything, and in that case, the tail is usually the first thing to strike the ground due to ground flare, and also the first place to get showered in fuel and burst into flames if the wing ruptures and spills while crashing. The safest place to be in a crash landing is the upper deck of a 747. Don't know about single-deck aircraft, but in 747 crash landings, most upper deck passengers survive if there isn't an explosion. Story 22. Do not stay in an area that's about to be hit by a Category 4 or higher hurricane. Even a strong 3, you should leave. If locals are packing up and going, leave. In hurricane country, there are the following: pine trees, which are easily felled in a hurricane of any magnitude; bad electrical wiring. It was only in the last few years that regulations were amended for hurricanes specifically. Water, there's tons of it anyway, but there's only going to be more, and you won't be able to drive or set up your precious backup generator; and easily removed roofs, which, again, until recently, were not adequately attached to houses for a hurricane. After my family got back after Florence, there were stories of people who had been injured or killed because a pine tree fell on their house, or they drive to go out during the hurricane, or they didn't get enough non-perishable food and ran out, or they were electrocuted trying to set up their generators or turn their power on before their area had been cleared, or they had been flooded and couldn't escape. Y'all, hurricanes are bad, especially if you haven't grown up seeing the difference in lower category hurricanes and higher category hurricanes. I can't tell y'all how many northerners moved down south only to underestimate a hurricane and be either injured, killed, or suddenly homeless. Florence got people bad because people thought it would be calm before it hit land, and it did. But it slowed down. That just meant the rain, many tornadoes, and wind just stayed and caused more damage. Keep the news on, and if they say it looks like it'll hit hard, go. Just leave. Don't risk your life when you could leave and know you'll be safe. Story 23. There's a scene in Batman Begins where Liam Neeson tells Christian Bale, who had just fallen into an icy lake and is now still and wet, huddling close to a campfire, trying to dry and warm his hands and feet, that he should rather make sure to warm the core of his body, the larger surface area, and that his limbs will take care of themselves. When asked in an interview about where he got this apparent survival knowledge from, he said he just made it up on the spot and they kept it in the movie because it sounded good. It is in fact not the best of advice, because the end of your extremities are supplied with blood via much thinner blood vessels, which are that much more likely to freeze and gradually stop blood flow, eventually causing necrosis. People have lost entire hands and feet in such situations. Good luck making it back to civilization alive without your hands and feet. So, first of all, love Batman Begins, great movie, but I recall this scene, I remember the first time when I heard it, and it was just jarring to me. I was like, hold on, is that really good advice? Focus on the core and your hands and feet will take care of themselves. So I've obviously never been in a situation where I needed to practically apply that, but to hear a Redditor weigh in here and basically shoot down that theory is comforting to know that my spidey senses or bat senses were on point when I watched that movie. Anyway, moving on. Story 24. A few. You can't suck venom out of a snake bite. It instantly enters your bloodstream, and all you'll be doing is putting bacteria on the wound as possibly ingesting the venom. Myth. If caught in a current, always swim parallel to the shore. Fact. While this is true if the current goes directly out to sea, many move out at an angle, and therefore it's best to swim parallel to the current at an angle away from the current and towards the shore. If you get lost in the wilderness, your priority is water and shelter, not food. We can go weeks without food, and while this length of time would certainly be reduced if you're out in the wild, you could comfortably not have any food for a couple days while you establish shelter and locate a water source. Story 25. In the event of a fire, you generally only have 1 to 2 minutes to extinguish it before it'll grow beyond what the average person in an average situation can handle. The proper fire response, in order, is RACE. R. Rescue people in the immediate vicinity of the fire. A. Alarm. Pull the closest pull station or call 911. C. Contain. Close doors/windows to contain the fire. Even a cheap, shoddy, hollow core interior door will help slow the fire spread. E. Extinguish/evacuate. If it's a small fire, try to put it out if you can. If you don't have an extinguisher at hand, or it doesn't do the trick, get out and wait for the professionals to arrive. Most fire extinguishers will only spray for 10 to 20 seconds before being empty. To use an extinguisher, pass. P. Pull the pin. A. Aim at the base of the fire. S. Squeeze the handle. S. Sweep the spray side to side. The best thing you can do to prevent injuries/deaths from fire is to have working smoke detectors. In the US, building standards now call for a detector in each bedroom, and one in each hallway outside the bedrooms. Detectors do wear out over time. You really should replace them when they reach 10 years old. Test them regularly, and if yours have replaceable batteries, replace them twice a year. Story 26. Don't eat snow because it will drop your body temperature. No, stop telling people that crap. Hunting guide, mountain climber, and winter snowshoe guy here. My vacations are spent deep in the wilderness solo. I was told not to do this, and yet it has kept me going on more than one occasion. This concept is actually entirely a myth most of the time, depending of course on the situation. If it's negative 40 degrees Celsius, build a shelter and fire first. Nothing to boil your snow in? Huddle by the fire and spoon it in like a greedy piglet. Any water you pack in is going to be frozen anyways at negative 40 degrees Celsius. If it's 5 degrees Celsius out and you aren't overly concerned about warmth, hiking a mountain trail and have sweat off your hydration, then eat the goddamn snow. Your mouth is warm enough to melt effing snow. Better to be hydrated than collapse or have painful headaches because of the lack of water. The only reason you wouldn't just eat the snow is if the loss of body heat puts you in the range for hypothermia. At that point, you should have built a fire about 20 minutes beforehand anyways. If you don't know what you're doing, why the hell are you in that position in the first place? Use common sense in every situation. Eat some effing snow, you thirsty female dog. Story 27. Don't climb a tree to escape a bear. That fluffy bastard will climb up after you. Do not run from a bear, or that fluffy bastard will chase after you. Back away slowly in the direction you came from with your eyes on the bear. Do not look away from the fluffy bastard. Talk gently and human-like. Bears have really bad eyesight and need to hear that you're human because the bear just knows that's a figure over there with a big stature and a smelly smell. Back away until both parties are comfortable, but mostly until the bear is comfortable. If the fluffy bastard still charges you, if it's a black bear, fight back. If it's a grizzly bear, you're effed. Don't fight back. Let it happen. You'll have less injuries than if you were to fight back. Lay down on your front with your arms covering the back of your head and neck for maximum protection. Hopefully at this point, the bear realizes you're a human and loses interest, and you get away with only massive lacerations going down the length of your limbs. Story 28. When bitten by a snake, do not suck the poison out of a snakebite wound. The poison moves too fast to suck out an adequate amount, could cause infection in the bite area, and is overall a useless method of treatment. Do not use ice, as this will block blood circulation. Do not use a tourniquet, as this will isolate the venom, which may cause permanent disfigurement in the affected area. Apparently, some people think electricity will neutralize the venom. No. Instead, immediately call medical services. Clean the wound with water/soap, not under running water. Dress the wound with bandages. Apply pressure on the wound. Watch for swelling, as it may indicate a poisonous snake from a nice little sneck. Story 29. Drinking urine. Almost always it's a bad idea. First, contrary to popular belief, urine is not sterile. Bacteria that lines your bladder and urethra have been found in urine. Second, the ingredients in your pee are not things you want to drink. Uric acid, ammonia, toxins your liver has already filtered, and the high sodium content can actually accelerate dehydration, making it about as wise as drinking seawater. Also not a good idea for the record. And the darker yellow the urine is, the less you're going to want to drink it, as it's going to be more concentrated with all the stuff you don't want to put back into your body. The primary benefit of drinking pee is psychological. It's just to give you the sensation of drinking. But if you really want to save it, recycle water. The best idea is to have some hard candy, chewing gum, or something to suck on. Swallowing your saliva recycles water. It keeps your mouth from drying out, and it can get you through until you find a water source. If you don't have any candy or gum on you, you can also pick up a small, smooth stone to suck on and get a similar benefit, just less flavorful. The smoother the stone, the better. River stones are probably going to work the best, though obviously if you can find a river, you should be set on the water part. Anyway, packing some hard candies in your survival gear might be a good idea. Story 30. If you're impaled or shot, you should remove the implement/bullet as soon as possible. Perhaps not a myth exactly, but it shows up often enough in media that plenty of people think it's what you're supposed to do. It will absolutely get you or the person you're trying to help killed though. For bullets, they don't need to be removed unless they're very close to very sensitive tissue, right beside a major artery or your spinal column, for example. In fact, you'll usually do more damage trying to get it out than just leaving it in there and letting the body heal around it. Fortunately, most people at least know to leave a bullet wound to a surgeon. So long as 911, or equivalent, is available, this isn't usually a problem. The other one comes up a little more often IRL because traumatic accidents are a thing. If, for instance, you got in a car crash and found a giant piece of shrapnel sticking out of your stomach, leave it there and don't touch it. Your first instinct may be, that's not supposed to be there, I should get rid of it. But that instinct is completely wrong. Yes, it just punched a giant hole in your body, but it's also the only thing keeping your blood in. It's essentially functioning as a giant plug, and pulling it out is like uncorking a wine bottle. I mean, sure, you're still bleeding either way, but you're losing blood a lot more slowly if you leave it in, and that can be the difference between surviving long enough for a doctor to save you and dying before they get the chance. This applies to stab wounds in your limbs too, not just big abdominal wounds. Get a big shard of glass stuck deep in your arm? Don't touch it. You can easily bleed out from the major arteries in your limbs. Basically, if you have a large foreign object stuck somewhere, it shouldn't be in your body. Always leave it for a doctor to remove. Story 31. That you should never drink untreated water. If your choice is between dying of dehydration or giardia, drink the water. Face the thing that kills you in 2 days, not 2 weeks. You should never eat raw meat. You can eat some raw meat. Deer, elk, and moose family are okay if they're a bit younger and died recently. Rabbits are edible raw if you enjoy chewing. Reptiles are a no-no, except for snakes. Never eat bear raw. Cook the crap out of it. So many worms. I hear this one a lot and it bothers me. Don't eat snow. I grew up in Alaska. I've done a fair bit of hunting, camping, backpacking, etc. If you're up and moving around being active, and it's morning or midday, eat the snow. Your body temp can always be raised through cardio, jumping jacks, push-ups, and squats. You'll be surprised how often you don't have a container to boil or put water into. You can become dehydrated quickly in cold conditions and not realize it until it's too late. Risk the slow death to save yourself from a quick death. Your mission is to survive and be found, not sit on your ass and think about how much it sucks. Also, just a tip, move slower when you're actively looking for food sources, water, etc. Slow it down, stop and listen to what's around you. You could be walking right past water or food and not even know. Be in the moment and not in your head. Story 32. If you get stabbed, don't pull out the knife. You'll most likely bleed to death. Wait for the ambulance. If you have frostbite, do not rub it. It will cause more damage. Take some painkillers and warm it up slowly. Also, don't go to sleep. That's a bad sign. And definitely don't abruptly get warmed, like no hot tubs or hot baths. Frostbite hurts really bad and that will make you go into shock or even a heart attack. Get some hot water bottles or heating pads. If you get bit by a snake, don't cut it. That's a myth and it will give you a higher chance of infection. Put on a pressure dressing and go to a doctor. If you're dehydrated, don't drink your pee. It's like drinking salt water. That's bad. You'll get more dehydrated. Don't eat snow for water. It can cause you to get hypothermia. Melt it first. Bears, if it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's white, say goodnight. Brown bears have short, round ears and a shoulder hump and are about 6.5 feet, 400 to 800 pounds. Black bears have taller ears and no shoulder hump, and they're around 5 feet, 100 to 300 pounds. Also, black bears are not always black. They're often brown or cinnamon colored. Story 33. Just learned yesterday that you shouldn't tourniquet a snake bite. Apparently, keeping the venom in one area can allow it to cause more damage to that body part. Also, when you reach, say, the hospital, they will have a more dangerous task of loosening the tourniquet slowly so that the venom and anti-venom mingle slowly, as the rush of venom could be bad news. Don't move as much as possible. Try to stay calm. Try to remember what bit you if you saw it. That's the gist of it at least. Edit. This information is for the US. Someone else wrote up info from an Australian perspective, and apparently that can make a difference. In the news story I heard, the doctor who chimed in was also specific about the fact that his advice had to do with US snake bites. So, just kind of a random observation here. I didn't know that there was a difference in the spread of venom between snakes in Australia versus the US. My dumbass just thought that venom was venom, so I guess it makes it all the more important to do your research and know the difference between the two, depending on where you're going to be outdoors at. Story 34. Drinking piss. Also, a lot of Hollywood use of tourniquets. A tourniquet's only use is to cut off blood flow to an extremity. You use one when a blood vessel is dumping good blood out of that extremity, and then it stays on until a medical pro can seal the vessel and probably surgically repair the injury. Many times I've seen scenes where someone gets a laceration and they tie a t-shirt tight as crap around the wound. Many times a superficial wound can be treated with a patch, and you can use a t-shirt as part of the bandage, but it does not get tied like a tourniquet. Unless you can't stop the bleeding, you need the blood at the wound to clean and heal it. So don't stop the flow unless it's your only option. Story 35. Seizure first aid is often wrong and can potentially seriously harm the person seizing. For generalized tonic-clonic seizure, the big seizures, do not hold them down. Do not put anything in their mouth. It's not possible to swallow your tongue. Time it. A seizure lasting more than 5 minutes is likely status epilepticus and won't stop without medical intervention. Move anything out of the way. Lay on side if possible. Put a pillow or jacket under the head to protect it. Get anything out of the mouth, like food, etc. They will be confused after, post-ictal, and often embarrassed. Get medical care if this confusion does not dissipate. Call 911 immediately if hit head and or neck. They have turned blue from oxygen deprivation, the person's first seizure, they are choking/airway obstruction. Story 36. I'm hesitant to say this, but drinking your own urine. You can't just consistently drink it if you're in the desert. You get one shot. Everything else you should absolutely not drink. The water content is too low, and you'll dehydrate yourself more quickly as it takes more water to process the waste again than it does to release it. You're better off urinating on your shirt and using the evaporative cooling to keep your body temperature down. You should only do this if you're very lost and have been for a long time. My boss did search and rescue and picked up a guy in the mountains who'd only been lost for 6 hours and drank his own urine in a panic. In the mountains. He had a water filter, and there's water in the mountains here, and he still drank his own urine after being out of water for 3 hours. Don't be that guy. Also, just take enough water into the furnace of the desert. One tiny Aquafina bottle is not going to get you up Observation Point in Zion. Listen to the locals. Story 37. No, you shouldn't drink moisture you find in a cactus. That's a lie. There are desert plants that have water that is safe to drink. Take a course to determine which ones and how to extract water safely from other sources. You can drink coconut water, but you can only drink about 2 coconuts of water a day. Anything more will give you severe diarrhea and could kill you faster by removing more hydration than you've put in. Always sleep off the ground, regardless of environment. Sleeping directly on the ground will suck all your body heat away. You can find something to sleep on that elevates you off the ground. In the desert, if you're lost, your best bet is to stay put. Find shade, or if in a vehicle, you stay with the vehicle. It's easier for someone to find you and easier for you to survive if you stay with your vehicle. It provides shade, and hopefully you brought water for the extreme temps. Do not go looking for help. Hell, light a tire on fire as a signal to increase your chances of being found. And in any situation, try to keep your morale high. You'll have a better chance of surviving if you stay busy, focused, and morale is high. You can die more easily otherwise. Story 38. If you see a bear, don't just lay down. It depends on the bear. Black bears are timid and rather docile. If you see one and don't want it to get close to you, make loud noises and try to scare it off. But if you just lay down, it will get curious and investigate. You can scare it off then because it will try to defend itself. Black bears aren't as aggressive with cubs as other bears, but still, don't go near them. Grizzly bears are highly aggressive and have a slab of muscle going across their upper back and will do some damage. If one is going to attack you, you need to get in a position with your back facing the sky, knees under you, and your hands covering your face and neck. Grizzlies are extremely aggressive when it comes to cubs. Even if she's wandered into your area, she will defend them with her life. Even playing dead, they aren't interested in dead things. Never run or climb a tree for any bear. They're better at both and will see you as prey. If for some reason you're in the North Pole and see a polar bear, just accept your fate, really. If it's a black, fight back. If it's a brown, lay down. If it's white, say goodnight. But remember the modifications. Story 39. A lot of gear in general. I think people tend to focus on buying survival gadgets that are marketed to them. I remember I bought this little magnesium fire steel thing that would be touted around camping and wilderness survival circles as being great for its convenience. I had it in an emergency bag for a while. One day, I was going to build a fire in my own fireplace indoors. I thought, hey, I should try that thing out just to practice. Well, I must have screwed around with it for 15 minutes trying to get a usable spark before giving up and grabbing some matches. I failed with my emergency fire starter on warm, dry firewood. No wind, no damp kindling, no severe cold, no injuries, or any other pressure. Problem is compounding issues. 1. Any gear without the accompanying knowledge skill to use it is near worthless. And 2. Some gear is just worthless. Even some things that can work in a pinch shouldn't be relied on as your primary attempt at being prepared. Story 40. Bad advice. If you're in a survival situation, you have to be willing to take risks. This is true and not true. Risks are worth taking. Sketchy water after 3 to 4 days when your pee looks like brown ale. Risk not worth taking. Sketchy water on day 1. Risk not worth taking. Sketchy water, food source almost any time. You have more than enough fat and muscle for your body to live on for 3 to 4 weeks. Just because you're hungry doesn't mean you're about to die. Risk not worth taking. Making an ascent or descent beyond your normal capabilities. Walking in the dark on uneven terrain. The number one rule in a survival situation is personal safety, because if you injure yourself or get sick, you're much more effed than if you're 100% and just tired and thirsty. Now, like anything, there can be occasions where you need to take a risk, but one must do so knowing the potential repercussions. Story 41. I've seen a lot of people learn one piece of bear survival advice and assume it works for every type of bear. Surprise! Different types of bears act differently. The prevention techniques are pretty much the same for all types of bears. Make noise while hiking, never approach the cubs. But if a bear decides it wants you dead, you have to be aware what kind you're dealing with. If a black/brown bear comes at you, act big and scary. Find a big stick and fight them off. They're small and you look like more trouble than it's worth. Chances are you've just wandered too close and it wants you out of its territory. For a grizzly, play dead. Face down, legs and arms apart, with your hands covering the back of your neck. Protect the important parts, while making it really annoying to flip you over. Eventually, the grizzly should leave you alone. I've never had to deal with a polar bear myself, fortunately, but a lot of people in northern towns will leave their cars unlocked so people have a safe place to hide if a polar bear walks into town. The only universal bear survival advice I have is never climb a tree. Bears climb much better than you and you just trap yourself. Story 42. That your natural reaction to danger will be fight or flight. There's a third option that doesn't get mentioned, and it's sad because it's cost many people their lives. The real responses to danger are fight, flight, or freeze. It's called tonic immobility. It's how opossums play dead, and I think it's what causes the fainting goats, if I recall correctly. It also might be why deer don't run when you're about to hit them with a car, and from what I've read about victims of SA, assault, and tragedies like the Virginia Tech shooting, it's the answer to why didn't they fight back? Some people have a reaction to fear that causes their brain to basically shut down. It's not that they didn't want to fight back, they were physically incapable. The rest of this is just a personal analysis, purely anecdotal. I feel like it might stem from your brain trying to find options, and if it can't, it decides to play dead instead and hope the danger goes away, which is why the only way to overcome it is to give your brain options. When I was in the Marine Corps, I was just a computer geek. What's up, fellow POGs? But I had a good buddy who was a legit operator, special forces and all that jazz. He relayed a quote to me one time that captures it really well. We don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. He attributed it to a Navy SEAL. Common mistake apparently, but it's really from a Greek poet named Archeologos. Basically, what it means is, it doesn't matter how many times you've imagined yourself in a stressful situation, or how well you think you know yourself. Unless you have physically trained your body to react, there's a good chance you'll just freeze up. That being said, everyone is different. Some people are great under stress and will never freeze up. Some might panic and freeze for a moment, but be able to pull themselves out of it. Some may go completely catatonic. The problem is, you literally have no idea until you've been put in a high stress/high fear situation. The reason I say all this is if there's any chance you could be put in a survival situation, get yourself some training. More is better, but even if it's only a little bit, giving your brain a plan when it's panicking could be the difference between having a fighting chance and just laying down to die. Story 43. The stop, drop, and roll method is grossly underexplained. I saw a video of a dude who got, his ankles or something like that, on fire. And the dude, remembering his training, doesn't run, falls to the ground, and starts rolling around in perfect barrel rolls. It's like nobody ever explained to him that the rolling doesn't magically put out fires. It's the contact with the ground that suffocates the flames. Dude's ankles were floating around in the air while his shoulders and upper body rolled around on the ground. Don't stop, drop, and roll. Instead, stop, drop, and press the fire into the ground. I'm sorry, but just the visual of this is throwing me off. How do you just set your ankles on fire and nothing else? Weird. Story 44. Aussie accent. Drink your own piss. Seriously, drinking your piss or blood yes, I've seen stories where people do this to hydrate themselves, is effing counterintuitive. Just consider all the crap your body has to process and filter out from either substance, and then imagine how much hydrating is actually being done in the process. You become even more thirsty, and you just drank bodily fluids for nothing. The best thing you can do is make sure you can pool your piss somewhere and drench your clothing in it. It's not particularly appealing or enjoyable, but this will buy you some time before you get some potable water. So this is like the 5th or 6th time that we've heard someone say, don't drink your own piss. And I mean, just by its literal definition, urine is waste, right? Just like poop is bodily waste. So if your body doesn't want it, that means that it is forcing out things that it cannot convert for nutritional purposes. So on top of it just being gross, you're putting back into your body something that your body has already said, hey, we don't want this, we don't need this. So I totally agree. Story 45. Almost anything Bear Grylls does. Elephant crap doesn't have water in. Don't eat bear crap. Drinking your own piss only poisons yourself. Don't run around free climbing cliffs in an emergency situation. Don't give yourself an enema with nasty diseased water. Don't put something possibly poisonous in your mouth to see if it tingles. That'll just get you sick or poisoned. In short, Bear Grylls is a dumbass and will get you killed. He should honestly be in jail for the amount of misinformation he spreads. If you want to watch a show that will actually teach you about wilderness survival, go watch Survivor Man with Les Stroud. He's an actual expert and doesn't even have a camera crew following him. Story 46. Any US here. The only animals you should be running from here are charging deer and moose, coons, beavers, snakes, and insects that have started swarming. Bears, wolves, coyotes, fishers, dogs, etc., you should not make eye contact and back away slowly. If you turn and run, you're dead. If attacked, fight like your life depends on it, because it does. Try to kill whatever's attacking, and if it gives up and leaves or backs off, get the F to shelter ASAP. If you have a gun, don't wait to see if the pretty bear or wolf or canine is just checking you out. Seemingly friendly dogs are the exception. Get that effer out and follow step 1. You don't have to wait to see if a feline is checking you out. It's not. If you see one, you're in danger. Get that effer out. Story 47. Coconuts are reputed to be an excellent source of water. However, this is very misleading. Coconut water has lots of things in it, including a diuretic which will actually further dehydrate you if you rely on it exclusively for your water needs. Same thing with cactus, really. Most cactus water actually has a lot of things in it that makes you more dehydrated, not less. In general, any water source needs to be purified before it can be safely consumed without risking unfortunate consequences. The safest way to do this is to bring it to a rolling boil and let cool before consuming. I don't care where it came from. If it came out of a body of water which was in contact with the ground, it needs to be boiled. And even rainwater can be suspect, depending on your collection method. Story 48. If someone breaks into your house and you own a gun, don't grab your gun. You having a gun gives the intruder a reason to shoot you if they have a gun. First off, if it's just a regular thief, most common case, they usually come in when nobody's home. And if they break in thinking nobody's home, then find out someone is home, they run out, avoiding contact at all. If they break in when they know you're home, they don't just want your stuff. If they break in to steal your stuff but have a gun, they will most likely kill everyone on site to avoid leaving witnesses behind. They also might not want your stuff at all. Maybe they want you and your family dead. Just pick up your gun, please. You have a much greater chance of survival. Story 49. 1. If you get lost, retrace your steps. Now, if you can't retrace your exact steps, and all cool, but if you're not sure, then don't. Stay in one area and wait for help, assuming you have no way of contacting anyone. 2. Don't eat snow if you're thirsty. The energy your body uses to melt the snow is not enough for the water to positively affect it. It'll just make it worse. If you can heat up snow in a pot, then drink it. 3. If you get something stuck in you, like you were stabbed with it somehow, do not pull it out. That'll just open everything, causing whatever damage it was blocking by being inside your body. And if you get stabbed with something in your eye, don't pull it out. You'll probably pull out your eye. Story 50. I've seen moss grows on the south/north side of trees myth a fair few times. Moss doesn't even grow on any particular side of trees or rocks. It grows almost randomly and can even grow in almost darkness, so don't ever use that for finding direction. Best bet is to use the sun. Learn when the equinoxes are, March and September, and which direction the sun will be at midday, sunrise, sunset, at different times of the year. For the northern hemisphere, March and September are the times where the sun will rise due east and set due west. Midsummer, June, it'll rise due northeast and set due northwest. Midwinter, December, it will be more southward. At midday, the sun will be due south all year. For the southern hemisphere, it's just the opposite. Swap wherever I had north with south and vice versa. Story 51. That you put someone's head up if their nose is bleeding. A teacher told a fellow student this, and I corrected her because I was in Scouts, and we learned that. You hold their head down when their nose is bleeding, because if you hold their head up, the blood goes back into the head and brain, causing some damage. Apparently, her son had a blood problem, never told me, but that a doctor said to do that for her son. If someone's nose is bleeding, step 1, hold their head down while pinching their nostrils. Step 2, and to prevent rebleeding, don't pick your nose, blow your nose, or bend down for a couple of hours. I recommend you a tissue to not get the blood on the floor, and if you start bleeding a couple hours after the first time, rinse and repeat. And forcefully blow your nose to get out blood clots. Yet if the bleeding lasts more than 30 minutes, it should only last 10 to 15 minutes, go to the goddamn hospital and they'll take it from there. Note, I will do a first aid class once I'm 16 because I'm a little rusty on this, but I looked up some information. Story 52. With splinters, do not use pliers or anything of the sort to dig it out. Credit card swipe and pulling it out by hand are okay. Digging with pliers will open up the wound more. Some kid got infected and had to go home from summer camp, 5-hour drive back. For ticks, pull them off slowly so that the head comes off. Your skin will stretch out, but they will let go when they can't hang on. Don't try and smother them. They don't actually need a body to survive. Their head can just get oxygen from your blood. For general emergency first aid, stay calm. We never know how we'll react in an emergency, but we can't do anything if we're panicked. Take a breath. AEDs literally tell you exactly what to do. You turn it on, place some pads, press the button if it says. Even tells you if and how long to do CPR. CPR rescue breaths aren't taught or recommended for regular people anymore. IDK about actual emergency medics. Don't do them. It's not because it's more to teach. They hurt more than help if done wrong. Source: 9 years of scouting, 4 years of seeing the biggest idiots that are 11-year-olds with knives. I've seen all these cases happen. Story 53. That just because it's sunny that morning doesn't mean it will stay like that. Always, always, always check the weather when you go out walking or hiking, and sailing. Don't rely on your weather app or the news either. Use dedicated mountain or nautical meteorological sources for accurate weather reports. And remember, it gets colder the higher you go, usually dropping between 2 to 3 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 feet you climb. So make sure you have correct footwear, several thin layers of clothing that you can build up, a waterproof jacket/trousers, and a hat and gloves. You may not need them, but it's better to be safe than sorry. Story 54. Do not rely on YouTube self-defense videos. About 90% of them are complete BS that will more likely make a dangerous situation even more deadly. If you happen to watch one of these so-called self-defense videos, test them out against realistic resistance. Have a practice partner come at you full force as if actually attacking you, in order to find out how effective the technique actually is. Especially avoid any techniques that are demonstrated against a non-resisting opponent. Women's self-defense videos are especially misleading, unfortunately. Story 55. There's this idea that grew out of a couple movies that if you find yourself in an urban combat setting, you should stay away from the walls and buildings, because certain ricochets hug the walls, essentially. Seriously, unless you've been to special warfare school or something, don't even entertain this idea. Buildings and walls are cover. They're the first place you go, other than getting as low to the ground as possible, and you stay against them unless there's some really pressing reason to move away from them. Kind of important. Story 56. To break a dog bite, shove something in their mouth. I've seen people try to get under a dog's jaw with sticks. That then break. Best bet is to get some kind of water and dump it on their face. The higher the pressure, the better. Never ever get between two dogs fighting. Let them work it out or try the water technique above. Fluffy may be your pet, but I've seen dog bites lead to amputation and death of human beings. I frequent dog parks and carry a break stick, like a metal billy club, just in case, but I always use the water first. Breaking up a dog fight with a break stick takes training, and isn't always the safest for the human involved. Story 57. Do not apply a tourniquet to a limb that was bitten by a snake. Tourniquets are means to stop major blood loss, like a severed artery or torn off limb. If you apply it in any other way, it will surely result in losing the limb. As well, if you remove the tourniquet quickly, the venom of the snake will flood into the bloodstream. Doctors will have to slowly remove the tourniquet so the anti-venom can reach the venom, but because they have to do it slowly, this increases the chances of the limb being amputated for necropsy due to lack of blood/oxygen flow. Best thing to do when bitten by snake is stay calm to keep heart rate down, don't move around much, and get to a hospital fast. Story 58. To stay still and wait for help. Sure, good if you're lost in a Walmart, but that's top tier stuff. You'd most likely die no matter what. What you want to do is 1. Find shelter, preferably around water/food. 2. Get water/food. Make sure to boil water and cook meat/other food that could contain bacteria. 3. Forage a bit and make a cup/bottle, campfire, and a spear. 4. Make a SOS sign/sign of human life. 5. Find a high spot to run to and also a spot by the ocean if there's no one near you, and make SOS signs there so boats/planes can see you. 6. Make a landmark near your shelter so you don't lose it. 7. Explore a bit more. This is all AFAIK, so take it with a grain of salt. All I know for sure is don't drink hecking urine. At most, boil it first if you really need to. Story 59. This is a much broader one, and so maybe not the real topic of the thread, but given the housing and homelessness crisis in the US, it's worth mentioning. New construction doesn't drive displacement. Scarcity does. There's an appealing meme that the less new housing you build, the less gentrification and displacement will occur. But multiple studies have shown that's basically not true, and that there's actually lower eviction and displacement rates within a block of new construction than there is on a neighborhood level. Intellectually, that makes sense. If people are moving to a neighborhood, prices are going up, period. If you create additional demand, those people will pile into a neighborhood regardless of whether or not there's a bunch of space. If there's no space for them, they'll simply push out the existing residents as they can pay more. If there is space, however, some of that pressure will be reduced. This isn't to say the fear of changing a neighborhood and gentrification is wrong, mind you, but that the problem is existent and unavoidable regardless of whether or not you build more housing for people, and that new housing serves as a pleasure release valve rather than simply putting all of the onus on the existing supply and forcing out the people who are already utilizing it. Given how bad our housing crisis is, especially in regions like the Bay Area, where we've added approximately 1 million units of housing in the last decade and over 7 million jobs, the survival myth of we need to build less housing because the new stuff is killing us in our culture is exactly what created the situation that's killing us. Story 60. I'm a cop and shoot to stop the threat. Whether the bad guy is injured or killed is none of your concern, as long as he stops being a threat. The best way to stop the threat is a center of mass hit. This has the greatest chance of incapacitating the bad guy for the least amount of effort. Center of mass hits can quickly cause shock. This is what actually stops the threat, but do have a pretty decent lethality rate. After the threat is stopped, get EMS rolling on your position as soon as possible, regardless of whether you think he's alive or dead. This is not only a morally justifiable action, but also gives you greater insulation from legal liability. Again, the survival of the bad guy is not your moral imperative, but if there's no longer a threat, there's no reason not to give them the greatest chance of survival, and subsequent prosecution under the law. If you have very good confidence in your abilities, and should the opportunity present itself, a direct hit to the central nervous system is hands down the best way to end a threat possible. Under lethal threat, CNS hits are absolutely morally justifiable, as successful CNS hits have the greatest chance of survival for the innocent. The fact that a solid CNS hit is usually fatal is, again, of no concern to you. Do make sure that your hit probability is excellent, though. A hit to the center of mass is way, way better than a miss to the CNS. In life or death situation, only hits count. Make sure you hit above all other considerations. Under no circumstances should you shoot to wound. For one thing, there really are no places in the human body that are not potentially fatal if shot. Even shots to the extreme extremities like fingers and toes can run the risk of lethal infection. Shots to the arms and legs can potentially hit vital arteries, which can lead to bleeding out in a matter of minutes. If the threat is not great enough to justify killing someone, it's not great enough to justify shooting someone. If all you have is a wounding shot, e.g. you can only see the bad guy's hands, then of course take whatever shot you have presented. But as stated at the very first, your goal is to end the threat, not wound. The wounding is just the method you're using to attempt to end the threat. It's not the end result you're looking for. In some cases, a simple wounding shot would only be likely to escalate the situation. In such a case, the best course of action is to just not shoot until a better shot presents itself. Use your best judgment, and be prepared to defend your actions should they not go as planned. Bad calls are not usually punishable unless it was really quite obviously wrong. Keep in mind that harm to innocents directly caused by you, such as a missed shot that hits a bystander, and almost universally considered really quite obviously wrong. Taking actions against a bad guy that fails to stop him makes him more mad and causes him to harm others, or usually not. Act accordingly. Similarly, under no circumstances should you shoot to kill. Shooting to kill is considered a form of vigilante justice. If the threat was stopped before the bad guy was killed, under the vast majority of circumstances, the killing would rightfully be considered murder. There are some possible exceptions for specific circumstances considered to be in the public interest, such as shooting fleeing felons. Check your local laws. Shots that were intended as nothing more than a kill shot also fall under this purview of vigilantism. Telling a court you shot to kill someone is vastly different than telling the court that you shot someone to stop them from harming others, even if the two shots were identical. One signals to the court your intent was to commit harm to the bad guy. The other signals your intent was to protect the innocent from harm in the most effective way possible. These two circumstances are handled vastly differently in the court of law. Make sure you understand this difference, not only legally, but morally as well. If you understand the difference on a moral level, you're far less likely to accidentally commit a bad shot and land yourself in justifiable hot water. Story 61. When you need to find a good, non-buggy game that will give you a great time and won't make you want to jump off a cliff, then play Fallout 76. When you play Fallout 76, you'll feel like it's 3019 when the 76th Fallout game will release, which it probably won't. But you need to say this is basically the same. This game is epic. This game will give you a fun time. When you're depressed, bullied by your friends, strangled by some 13-year-old, or when the usual stuff happens, Fallout 76 will bring a smile to your face like it bring a smile to mine. I've never played this game, but it's good, right? Oh god. Fallout 76 officially releases on PC, PS4, and Xbox One on November 14th. Early impressions are somewhat negative, with people criticizing the game's lack of non-player characters, jittery performance, and seeming emptiness. Some players, though, excited for the game's release following their time with it in the beta, try to make up for that by role-playing as NPCs themselves and greeting new players by giving them extra items. Among the game's problems are glitched power armor suits, campsites that keep breaking, and an inventory system that's too small. Kotaku. Bethesda did an oopsie. Story 62. There's a myth that made the rounds on social media a while back that airlines are actually trying to trick you when the flight attendants give you tips to survive in the event of a crash landing. Someone thought that if you're injured, airlines have to pay you millions of dollars, but if you're killed, they don't have to pay you at all. So it's in their best interest to have passengers die in a plane crash. So the survival tip is telling people to ignore head down between your knees, brace yourself, since that will supposedly get you killed because your back will break immediately on impact. Instead, you're supposed to sit up straight and put your feet on the chair in front of you. You break your legs, but not your back. This is all a ridiculous conspiracy theory that will likely get you hurt worse if you ever are in a plane crash. Story 63. When being attacked by an animal, play dead. This is horrible advice. Most animals can tell that you aren't dead, and even if you are, they have no problem still ripping you apart. Throwing yourself on the ground to pretend to be dead just takes away every chance you had to run or fight back. Also, drinking your pee won't solve dehydration. It will give you slightly longer to find water, but as you recycle it, it will have less and less water in it and more bodily waste in it, and soon it will be of no benefit to you. Also, pee is not sterile, and so you can easily get an infection if you rub it in wounds or something. Pee and poop is literally your body's way of getting rid of waste, so it's full of nasty stuff you don't want. Story 64. Not so much a myth, but you should know that what Bear Grylls does in his shows is focused more on entertainment than survival education. In most cases, the reckless stuff he does is more likely to get you killed than a calm and collected approach. Squeeze nasty water out of crap? Eat the random dead animal? You'll end up with diarrhea and/or vomiting, leading to dehydration, cramps, and not thinking straight, all decreasing your chances of getting out alive. Jumping off the waterfall, climbing the vines, rushing about, Looks cool on TV. Just remember that a broken ankle similar will also dramatically reduce your chances of survival. Find a safer way to walk around. In general, stay calm and take stock of your situation. Also, drinking your piss does no good if you're already dehydrated when you pee. Story 65. I mean, my number one would probably be I can just walk out. The vast majority of the time, the best thing to do in a survival situation is stay still and wait for rescue. If you weren't a complete knob, you've told someone where you're going, and the search party will start on that path. If you've just wandered a couple of kilometers off it, you'll probably be found within a day. If instead you decide to just walk out, there's little to no hope of the search party finding you. At that point, your chances of surviving have gone from pretty decent to probably gonna effing die. You'll walk in circles, you'll get lost, you'll take the hardest possible route, you'll underestimate how much water you should be drinking, you'll underestimate how tired you'll be after 2 days of hard traveling without food, you'll underestimate how hard it is to acquire food and water both. That's all to say, Spotlight GPS beacons can be rented for like $20 a week. If you want to go play Survivor Man in the woods, there's no reason to go without one. You should also let someone know your itinerary, and how long they should wait to call for the search and rescue team. Then you should stick to the plan, and stay put if crap goes sideways. Story 66. 1. Fitness. It's not about running 20 kilometers per day or benching 200 pounds. Practice what you plan. This means get out there and hike through a trail using your pack and your survival clothes. If your GHB is for between work and home, try hiking to work and back with your kit. 2. Run for the hills. Movies like to portray this a lot. It's flat out wrong. Bug in unless you're facing a forest fire or something of that level, so plan your kit for mostly bugging in. 3. Redundancy. Those 6 knives and 2 saws and 2 hatchets and 3 multi-tools will not help you except to weigh your kit down uselessly. Just because you have it doesn't mean you can use it. Just because you have more than one doesn't mean you're better at it. This false sense of reality is very, very deadly. 1 knife properly cared for and used proficiently is much, much better than 6. 4. Fads. This sub has it all the time. 1 week it's all about survival straws. The next it's about tactical tissues. The next is about survival book collections. Never buy into this crap unless you know what you're using and can understand the pros and cons. Story 67. The misconception that because you own an item, you'll actually be able to use it without training. That includes simple items such as flint, firearms, or a map and compass. Just because you have flint and steel doesn't mean you know how to build a tinder bundle and make fire. Just because you have a rifle doesn't mean you know how to stalk game and sustain yourself. Just because you have a map and compass doesn't mean you can successfully navigate through woods and across elevation. All of these items are great to have in a survival scenario, but they become significantly less useful without the corresponding skills. Don't get me wrong, even if you have 0 background, you should still carry them if you may be thrust into a situation where you do need to survive. But you'd be significantly better off if you had practiced with them beforehand. Story 68. A. Fat is not tactical. Being in shape is the number one thing you can do to survive. People concentrate on buying gear, etc. If I'm a predator, I'm going to take all the gear and survival equipment from the fat neckbeards who need to change clothes due to sweat after walking a block with their get-home bag. If we stick to a strict lost in the wilderness concept, you need the proper fitness to get yourself out of a mess. B. This crap needs practice. People with bug-out bags that can't walk a few miles without angina attacks, thinking they can start a fire in the cold and rain with an injured hand and a flint and steel. C. Winning a gunfight is possible just by owning a gun, or 4 knives in the bug-out bag. GPS, maps, compass, no idea how to use them. In short, gear over skill. D. Once again, practice, but take a class or training so you aren't developing training scars and bad habits. Story 69. One of the biggest misconceptions is in focusing on objects, items, and strategies too much. As others have correctly pointed out, the knowledge about how to use the gear is the pivotal issue, but that's not what I'm talking about. A rampant, insidious, commonly shared misconception in the field of survival is that some imagined future is more significant or important than the present life. It is wise to prepare, but if your focus and energy, and to call a spade, fear are all directed towards some imagined future disaster, then I'm sorry to say, but you're already dead. You've lost your present life. If someone really cares about survival, they'll correct their relationship with their current life and their present moment. Taking care of the present moment also happens to put you in the best standing in terms of future events, as the seeds you sow later bear fruit. What you do now unfolds into your good or bad situation later, and what we all do together unfolds into our shared world. Story 70. Common myth: bigger is better or smaller is better. There's no set rule. There's only how well a tool works in given situations. The bigger is better attitude, in selecting knives for instance, sometimes has more to do with ego and fantasy than with the usefulness of the tool. There are many bushcraft woodworking operations that have become more difficult or even impossible with a blade that's too deep, or that has a too wide bevel angle. By the same token, just because an item is small and light doesn't make it best. You'll often hear that the small item you have in your pocket is much better than the big one you leave at home. But in survival situations, one sometimes is much better off mustering the determination to carry a few more ounces so that a sturdier tool will be available. One point to consider: a big kettle can make a lot of tea or a little tea, but a small kettle can only make a little tea. As the stakes increase and the conditions become more inhospitable, efficiency comes at more of a premium. The ability to get things done quickly may make all the difference, and that sometimes means opting for the bigger saw, axe, or whatever. For example, when sheltering from scratch in the boreal forest in winter, you'd better be able to acquire large amounts of wood, and fast. Enough for the shelter frame, plus at least a car-sized pile for the fire that will keep you alive overnight. A small pocket saw just won't do in that situation, and will pretty much be as useless as having nothing at all. Story 71. There are way too many shoddy survival kits on the market. They're stuffed full of tiny, cheap, flimsy tools. People buy these things thinking that they'll be able to rely on them in a crisis, but they're putting their faith in tools which are not even able to hold up under light usage. Also, survival knives. I see so many ultimate survival knives, it's nauseating. People seem to think that if you cram as many doodads onto your knife, it will be more useful, when it often sacrifices utility for critical tasks. Knives with match compartments in the handle don't have a full tang for the blade, leading to a catastrophic failure when used for heavy tasks. Compasses in them but prevent you from using the knife for hammering. Serrations or sharpening on the spine of the blade tear make it tougher to do batoning. Story 72. That stormproof matches are the best tool for lighting a fire in a storm, or in some cases, that they help at all. Yes, they flare for several seconds regardless of wind or rain, but that sparking flare itself extinguishes any useful flame until the match burns down close to your fingers. Then the window of opportunity is small. The flame is close to your hand, and as the flaring dies out, the match is rendered a regular, non-stormproof match. Much better is to find a nook under a boulder or tree where you can initiate the fire and protect it until the kindling is burning, or fashion a windbreak with your jacket. If necessary, use another piece of clothing or tent fly, or take off your jacket and spread it across a flame to provide shelter for starting the fire. Next, optimize your tinder. The best dry, fluffy tinder you have, augmented with alcohol or other volatile substance like pine pitch, and nested within a hug-sized bundle of twigs, will quickly create a fire that no wind will extinguish. On the contrary, wind will only whip it up into a stronger flame. Story 73. Stocking up canned goods and ammunition in your bunker 5 miles inside your rural property, waiting for the global economic collapse that will never come, or a zombie apocalypse that somehow bypassed the entertainment part of your brain and dove straight into the "holy crap, I'd best prepare for this" sector is comical. I bet you wear tinfoil hats too. I'm so glad the mods are attentive to driving off these detractors. Also, don't get a book on plants and start eating wild things. Good way to die or get serious stomach pains. An armchair survivalist will never survive one, hyperbole, cold night in practice, regardless of how many books they've read, movies they've seen, and Q&As they'd asked. Story 74. You don't use iodine tablets before nuclear war or exposure to prevent radiation sickness. You use them during/after exposure to stop your thyroid from uptaking radioactive iodides. MREs are something you shouldn't be eating constantly. They're mainly for soldiers who have no other option and need to eat them on the go. They'll upset your stomach and cause constipation if you eat them too much. Don't make MREs your only food prep. They don't even have as long of a shelf life as freeze-dried foods or other properly preserved dry goods/canned foods. A low-power gun that you're familiar with and good with is better than a high-power gun that you have no experience with. You cannot find water using dowsing rods or through water witching. Physics don't work like that, yo. I've seen Les Stroud push water witching. Cooking spoiled/infected food doesn't make it safe. Even though the bacteria will die, they can leave behind nasty things that will still make you sick. so don't try to make well-done roadkill and expect it to be safe just because it's charred. Story 75. If you hit someone over the head hard enough to knock them unconscious, you've seriously injured them. At best, they'll wake up with a concussion. Most likely, they will be brain damaged or die. Yet on TV, that's the standard way of keeping someone quiet for a while. Also, on TV, concussions are just headaches. In real life, concussions are a damaged and bruised brain that also causes you to puke violently for a day. Had one once. Not fun. Also on TV, they always say to keep the person awake. Wrong! Let them sleep. The brain needs sleep to heal. The worst thing you could do is keep them awake. Another common TV thing is to duct tape someone's mouth closed. Not okay. There are many medical issues that can make this a death sentence. Asthma? A deviated septum? Panic attacks? Just plain old sobbing hard? There's a reason why we have 2 openings to breathe. Story 76. Bugging out being better than bugging in is highly dependent on the situation. Incoming or arriving nuclear weapon fallout is a major example of a situation where bugging out or not sheltering will kill you. Use of duct tape and plastic to seal yourself into a safe room or shelter. You should only do this if sheltering from a chemical attack or incident with a vapor-borne threat like sarin. The sealed environment should only be maintained long enough for the agent to dissipate or for evacuation to commence, a few to several hours. If you attempt to shelter long-term, such as from nuclear weapon fallout, carbon dioxide, the stuff you exhale, can build up and kill you. This will happen long before the oxygen in a room runs out. Story 77. So I think the tampons thing is stupid too, but I've met a lot of military corpsmen, including some that were with some high-speed window lickers, and they almost all seem to love tampons for gunshot wounds, and many of them have actually treated people for gunshot wounds. I'm not going to put any tampons in my kit. I still think proper medical gear is better, but there are some people who actually do that crap for a living that love tampons, so who am I to argue? Story 78. Number 2 was taught by Morris Koshansky. He used to say, never leave a skill to be learned in an emergency. People look at things and make the absolutely dumbest, most infantile mistake of thinking they can just figure it out later. When I was like 7, I learned that lesson trying to make a raft from a Boy Scout manual that turned out to be a loose pile of wood. Almost nothing is as easy as it seems, and adults who make that mistake are a special kind of dumb. These are people who can't even adjust for magnetic declination. They think they can, so they turn the bezel of their compass to the declination markings and start navigation. Wrong. That's backwards. You're supposed to turn the base plate of the compass and then adjust the bezel back. The answer is Dunning-Kruger syndrome. Story 79. Alone has its problems, but I like that it shows experienced, seasoned people who frequently do this sort of thing for fun, mind you, struggling, and sometimes failing, to build adequate shelter over the span of several days. Instead of relying on myths or Facebook wisdom, I tell people to go take a hike. We have so many beautiful state parks out here, many with dispersed or low-impact camping. You can rough it as much or as little as you like, and you've still got a decent safety net of people in the area and rangers that will come looking for you after you've been parked a few days. That lets you see exactly how good you'd be at building a shelter or harvesting your own food without the risk of death if you fail. Story 80. Something you'll see in survival media is people putting a roof over their heads. This is important, but not the most important. 3 hours without shelter is completely lacking shelter, and a large enough tree can provide you enough shade/protection from elements to be a temporary shelter. Your first priority for building a shelter is to build a sleeping mat. The ground gets cold enough at night to freeze you, so having an insulating layer is extremely important. If you have to make the choice between building a roof over your head or building a sleeping mat, 9 out of 10 times go for the sleeping mat under a tree. The other 1 out of 10 times are if you're in extreme weather and need a roof now. Story 81. While there's a lot of willful ignorance and downright stupidity, there's a significant amount of well-intentioned and genuine people who get honestly confused and overwhelmed due to a flood of both genuine and bad information. Prepping has become mainstream, and companies have capitalized on that. A few examples. Many years ago, I snagged AR-500 body armor. Great reviews, bunch of YouTubers testing it, etc. I didn't know any better. I did eventually sell it and buy legitimate armor after learning more about armor classes/standards. In the same realm, that promotional stuff happened with black Berkey water filters. The reality and truth of the product only now having come to light within the past few years. Companies spend tons on advertisements/promotions, and unless you're really aware of it, it can seem like genuine endorsements from people you can trust. Another common misconception/mindset seems to be, amusingly, that just won't happen. I've seen preppers say it along with non-preppers. Just because something hasn't happened in your location doesn't mean it won't ever happen. Everyone is valid to prepare for what they see fit, be it standardized disasters, power outage, hurricane, etc., or more severe events such as power grid collapse, extreme pandemic, etc. Within preparedness, in my opinion, you shouldn't ever tell someone that's silly to prepare for because it'll never happen. In a different vein, I always found it rather amusing that some people genuinely seem to be prepping to raid others. The concept of preparedness and logic seems utterly lost on them, especially in context of many people being prepared for people like them. Are there plenty of trolls? Sure, but there's also people who seem to think, I'll just find a Mormon and get a shotgun is a good idea. Story 82. Biggest myth. Prioritizing arms over cleaning supplies, fire extinguishers, food, and shelter. If you have an AR but don't have a 15-pound extinguisher on every floor, you're prioritizing the less likely risk. The preps I've used most often: blue tarps, mops, buckets, staples and staple gun, firing strips, simple green, bleach, coolers, headlamps, stored water, fire extinguishers, bandages, and antibiotic ointment. While I do have a personal friend who used a firearm to get out of an attempted carjacking in NOLA during Katrina, I've never had call to use in any of the multiple natural disasters I've experienced. Other myths. Having supplies magically gives you the ability to use them. For everything from making a fire in adverse conditions to hunting with a gun you've never hunted with, or gardening with a can of seeds when you've never had a garden, to thinking you can get a good night's sleep with a Mylar space blanket, the gear will not do what you think it will without an informed, trained user. The biggest illusion is the idea that hungry people will form roving bands that will go around pillaging. I've been in several places where there were famines, and yes, armed gangs will steal UN rice to resell, but the starving people I've seen weren't going anywhere. The BBC trope of people too tried to blink away flies is the reality. Story 83. The importance of community in surviving past the short term. A lot of preppers have this me/us versus the world mentality, and the idea that they're just going to survive completely on their own or with their small family. If we look back at what we know about how people lived in pre-modern civilization, we know that community living was the norm and living alone without the support of a community was rare, probably because it's a lot more difficult. A community gives you a trade, a certain amount of protection, a way of sharing information and trading skills, and also just stops you from going insane from only talking to the same people constantly. Honestly, the list goes on, but preppers seem really resistant to the idea of participating in a community in a SHTF type event. I'm not sure if it's fear because they perceive anyone who's not in the immediate family unit to be a threat, or just disillusionment with the current societal system. Either way, if we're talking about surviving past the short term, being a part of a community gives you the best odds of survival in my opinion. But it's not one that's shared by many preppers from what I've seen. The biggest one amongst non-preppers is the idea that they can just hunt for survival in a SHTF type event. Whilst, depending on your environment, it might be possible to support yourself through hunting under normal conditions, in a mass event, I guarantee you every man and his dog is going to have the same idea. Wild animals are not an infinite source of food, and humans en masse can quickly deplete the easy-to-access sources of protein. See any of the extinct or nearly extinct animals hunted to extinction. Plus, I think a lot of them are overestimating their ability to hunt. LOL. Story 84. Myth. Gold, or silver, bullets, seeds, etc., will be the new currency, and you should stock up for barter. Granted, this is for extreme SHTF scenarios, but in a situation where fiat currency breaks down, I think there's too many variables to make this kind of guess. Also, and more importantly, I don't think barter worked the way most people think in trying to establish a new fiat currency because silver has always had value, and these are pre-1964 quarters is kinda silly if you really think about it. Myth. Everyone would die in a nuclear war, or the radiation would take care of who's left. I guess this one depends on scale, but that's not really how nuclear weapons or fallout works. Myth. Having bug-out land that you can just keep in your back pocket until SHTF is a good idea. If you're planning on moving to land that doesn't have improvements to start a farm after things go south, you're probably just going to starve to death. Myth. The timeline is X, and it's going to be Y that does it. It started reading peak oil theorists in 2003. Some have been on and about some things, and off about many others. But all that aside, there's plenty of surprising events over the last few years that were not on my bingo card. I think it's important for preppers to anticipate, sure, but we really shouldn't marry our ideas. Go with the evidence, always. Story 85. Myth. An EMP will wipe out all electronics. I think the jury's still out on that. Another myth. A nuke strike is not survivable. It really depends on how far you are from the blast zone. Also, all the usual stuff from apocalyptic fiction. Cannibals, roving biker gangs, and the good guys winning every time.